Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Mountain Garden. Sorry it's been so long since the last one. In this episode we're going to be talking about solar, although there have been a few other changes like this tree, which rather unfortunately we had to cut down right in front of the house. The tree had actually died. It's a madrone tree. They're not overly long-lived trees in the redwood forest. Redwoods live an awful lot longer, and sadly that one had completely died. Now, there are a few things that I'm going to cover in a later video, namely what we did right, what we did wrong, all that sort of thing. As a refresher, here's the house. We didn't end up putting any solar panels on the house itself, although to be perfectly honest, I really wanted to put at least a few panels on the roof that would have helped insulate the roof just a little bit in the summer. Unfortunately, I got overruled on that, and it's not entirely without logic. At this point in time, the roof is about 12 years old. So if we had put panels on the roof, you might have some worries about water intrusion, the integrity of the roof, etc. But if you're planning on re-roofing, that might be the time to put panels on the roof. Of course, we do have a reasonable amount of land. We have about 9 acres or so the panels are really nowhere near the house. In fact, they're just about on the opposite side of the property. They're way down there. While I hike down to the panels, I'll talk a little bit about what we learned in this process. The first thing that I learned is you should definitely go big with your solar array and your battery array, because moving off-grid does require an adjustment to your lifestyle. I thought I had a really good handle on how much energy we were using the Sense devices and the PG&E bills and the smart meter and all that together, but I hadn't really anticipated that this summer would be as hot as it really was. Up here in the Santa Cruz Mountains, we had about 5 days straight where it was over 100 every day. Even the redwood trees in the forest got a little bit singed. Now on the bright side, that meant it was sunny out all day, but on the downside, it meant that we were using the air conditioning 24 hours a day, and I really hadn't factored that into my calculations. I also hadn't factored into account the new gray water processing system that I have right here. This is a 2,500 gallon tank, and then the ozonator and blowers that are constantly running for this particular system. That didn't exist when I was running my initial load calculations, so that did factor in there. The result is that we've ordered a few more solar panels. Hopefully we'll be adding those to the array very soon. I think that with some extra solar panels during the day, we should be able to last through the night. When calculating everything out, you really need to pay attention to those limited use case scenarios. Say, for instance, you have the air conditioning on and you want to use the oven. Say you want to have the dryer on at the same time. You either have to adjust the way you're living, or you have to adjust your solar to fit with what you're doing. The one benefit to being on a utility all the time is that you just don't have to worry about those sorts of things. The other thing I hadn't properly anticipated is that during fire season, not only is PG&E shutting off the power now in Northern California, but the skies were almost completely overcast. Our array on a good day was making about 8,000 watts of power, but during the near total eclipse of the sun during noon on a fire day, we were actually generating only 100 watts. And that's why we ended up buying a 7,000 watt diesel generator right here. So this has been added to the system, so this will generate power when the solar's not producing power, and of course when the utility power is off. I ended up getting that diesel generator because it has a long run time and it produces really clean power. The 5,000 watt gasoline generator that I had before really upset my inverters for some reason. When switching to and from generator power, sometimes they would error out and reboot themselves, and that was kind of a pain in the butt. For a little bit of a refresher, here's the inverter bank. I have 3 of these Schneider Connext XW Pro inverters. You can see they're all paralleled right there. This is the one thing that I'm really glad that I did, because some of the peak loads on this system really would have overloaded just 2 of them, so 3 turned out to be exactly the right number. On the downside, all 3 of those inverters connected to the lead-acid battery pack via what seemed like the right size cable, these quadruple-aught copper wires, ended up being a little bit small, so I'm actually going to end up doubling those in order to help reduce the voltage loss. From here you can see that the shed that houses the inverters is almost complete, and then right there under that house wrap we have the battery bank. That's going to be inside a concrete and metal roofed battery box. Hopefully that will be complete before the winter comes. But back on the battery cables, one thing that I noticed after having operated this system for a while is that on weekends, when you might want to bake something first thing in the morning, the battery voltage would end up being a little bit too low. But according to the voltage trackers on the battery itself, the voltage was okay. It was within reasonable limits there at the battery point, but by the time it got to the inverter, because you're drawing 200 amps from the battery bank, then the voltage had dropped about a volt or so. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was enough to make those inverters error out, and you'd have to reset the voltage limits on them. So I've decided to double up the battery cables. Hopefully that will fix that particular problem. As you walk along the path to the solar panels, you notice that every so often we have a bunch of different panels right here like this. Those are junction panels for the DC power coming up from the solar panels over there to the inverter shed and the battery storage, and then AC power going back down the hill so that way you can power things whenever you want to over here. It also helps power the Wi-Fi access points and security cameras that we've positioned around the forest so we can monitor the wildlife, make sure that no one's trying to take off with a solar panel or anything like that. The trail network here on this property at this point is probably about a mile long overall, and the distance between the solar panels and the inverter shed is perhaps a less than ideal, about 1,300 feet or so. And then from there, it takes kind of a crazy path, about another 800 feet from the inverter shed back up to the house. Here's a closer look at the panels. These happen every 200 feet or so along the run. We have the DC junction box, an AC breaker panel right there. And then we also have reclaimed water. This is gray water from the gray water recycling system, and then fresh water right here at regular intervals as well. As we come around the bend, you'll start seeing the solar array here. There are two different sets of panels. One has 12 panels on it, and the other has 16 panels on it. You'll notice that the panels are not all pointed the same direction. This bank of panels right here is pointed to get early morning sun. So right around 7 a.m. or so in the summer, at this time of year, maybe about 8:30 to 9 a.m., these panels start generating their maximum load because these are pointing near south, perhaps even a tiny bit southeast in this area. Now, if it's really foggy in the morning, they're not going to be generating too much power, but they still generate some power, and that is kind of handy. We learned this particular lesson from some friends of ours who have their panels pointing mainly towards afternoon sun, which is the strongest sun of the day. But in their setup, they have to wait until the afternoon to really start generating enough power to recover from a long night of really heavy power use. That's where the second set of panels comes in. This is the smaller set of panels. This is pointed towards afternoon sun. So after this panel's peak happens about 45 minutes to an hour later, the way that these panels are pointed right now. I was surprised that there's as much overlap as there really is. When the sun is really high in the sky, especially during the summer, it's really producing a great deal of power on both of these sets of panels. The racking system I opted for is made by Iron Mountain. It's designed for use on 2-inch conduit or 2-inch galvanized Schedule 40 pipe. You can see this is the smaller array. However, this is the array that we're going to be adding to because we decided to add a few additional panels just to make sure that in some of those weaker sun months that we have some extra power coming in. You can also see that at the moment that panel is still getting just a little bit of solar, but the one that's pointed east actually isn't really getting any. That's because the sun's gone completely behind the hill. This is where I'm really glad that we use some of the solar tracking apps that are out there that you can get for your Android phone or your iPhone, because they really help you align the panels to the best use case for your area. If our property went just a little bit beyond that hill towards the road there, we could have put some additional panels that were also pointed east and could get that extra evening sun. We just don't have that kind of real estate available. So we're probably going to add a few panels to the array that is pointing more southerly, and then we're going to add about double the panels that exist right there for that array that points to the east. The design capacity on this array is currently 10.5 kilowatts. It's important to remember in your calculations that you will never really achieve the maximum output of your solar panels. On a really, really good summer's day, we can get about 7.5 kW out of that array. That's about what I had expected. Planning for future expansion is definitely important. I'm glad that when we ran everything, we ran decently sized conduit so we could pull additional wires through it when needed. We could, for instance, put a third bank of solar panels down there rather than simply adding to the two existing banks. But I'm glad that Schneider also released a brand new charge controller. And if you're debating getting a Schneider Connect system, I would say get the biggest charge controller that you can, because you can always add panels to it. And their brand newest charge controller has an interesting feature. It will let you overcommit the array. So the array is, say, theoretically good for up to 6,000 watts or so, something in that neighborhood, but you could connect 7,000 watts of panels to it, and the charge controller is able to handle that. Now, it won't ever charge at 7,000 watts, but it will allow you to connect larger panels to the system, that larger capacity, and then it will control the charge to the battery and make sure that it doesn't overvoltage and error out. The charge controllers that I have currently, the 80 amp variety, they will try and adjust to a larger array, but they do end up erroring out and you end up leaving power on the ground basically. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching this video, and stay tuned because hopefully, as I always say, there will be more videos coming up. Be sure and comment down there in the comment section and let me know what you'd like me to cover in my upcoming video, which will hopefully be on mistakes we made with the solar system, what you think you should know if you're planning to go off the grid, and just general Q&A. So let me know all that down there in the comment section below, and I'll see all of you later.